Hey everybody, this is Neil Pasricha, and welcome back to Chapter 19 of 3 Books. This is the show where we are on a 15-year-long journey to uncover and discuss the 1,000 most formative books in the world. There isn't an algorithm that can spit out those 1,000. There isn't a person that can do it because it'd just be one person's view or one algorithm's view. What we want is this tapestry. We want to actually sit down live and on location with 333 of the world's most inspiring people, like we just did in Chapter 18 with David Sedaris in the back of his limo, like we did way back in Chapter 6 with Judy Bloom down in Key West, Florida, Chapter 5 with Gretchen Rubin, Chapter 4 with Sarah Ramsey. It's a journey. It's a pilgrimage. It's a marathon. And we want to constantly diversify our inspiring person base. So this chapter is the first one where we talk with an entrepreneur, like a billionaire entrepreneur of a global brand, the founder and former CEO of Lululemon, Chip Wilson. We're going to fly to Vancouver for this one, set up shop in the Gastown district of I guess, downtown Vancouver, and Chip's current holding company called Hold It All. He's now retired from his full-time job working as CEO and product designer of Lululemon, but it's really been quite a storied past. You see, way back in 1979, Chip founded a company called Westbeach. He sold it in 1997, and as he says, while flipping through the paper, came upon a piece of fascinating information, which is that women have outtaken men in terms of graduating from colleges and universities. So he's like, they're going to have money, they're going to live downtown, they're going to want active clothes that fit their lifestyle, and he launched this brand called Lululemon. Put the first store in the year 2000 in Kitsilano, which is a neighborhood in Vancouver. And for the next 6 years, he served as the company's CEO. After that, he was the chief product designer, and he's become, through the success of Lululemon, growing bigger and bigger and further, one of the world's richest people. Today, Chip Wilson is retired, although that word is in quotation marks, because he's doing so much. He's raising 5 boys. He's founded this Imagine One Day Foundation with his wife to work on improving education in Ethiopia. He's doing all kinds of building developments, and most recently, he just released a book called Little Black Stretchy Pants. Of course, the unauthorized story of Lululemon. This was a thrilling conversation for me. Like I said, it was our first kind of big name CEO that we've had on the show, and hopefully not our last. We're going to have a lot more, I think, in 2019, 2020. But we discuss a lot of things. We discussed the future of masculinity. How do we move past a complaining mindset? And how do we eventually in our lives measure success? I thought this would be a perfect chapter to sort of finish off 2018, a great year together. And without further ado, let's go down to the Gastown district of Vancouver and listen in to understand and discuss the 3 most formative books of Chip Wilson. Hi, Chip.
Hello.
Thank you so much for sitting down with me on 3 books.
Well, thank you very much. I am very excited about this.
Oh, well, why?
Well, because these are 3 books I think they revolutionized my life. And I think that if I can give some context to them, I think they'll help revolutionize other people's lives. I mean, obviously,
perfect.
They're the best in the world.
Yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. Before we get into the books, as I understand it, we're in the Gastown neighborhood of Vancouver. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
Tell me about this neighborhood and this office, so I can just give the listener a mental picture of where we are right now.
Well, we're in the oldest part of Vancouver. Actually, right out in front of this building is where the first city hall was. It was a tent. And it's at an intersection, a really cool intersection of, it kind of looks like that, I don't know, that triangle building that's in New York when you kind of go down Broadway.
Flatiron.
Yeah, Flatiron. So we have one of those buildings on this corner, and then it's not like a perpendicular intersection, so it kind of has 5 different areas kind of coming into one, and it's a real people area, old warehouses that have been converted, and then of course the building that we're in is alongside the railroad tracks, which is alongside the ocean. Wow. And so where all the ports are, and I see 23 different types of transportation. And then beyond the ocean, of course, maybe about a kilometer away or 3 in city ski mountains. So it's a fantastic place.
You might be in one of the most beautiful parts of the world.
It is the most beautiful part, and I've lived everywhere. So
The only place I can think of that comes close, and of course I haven't been everywhere, is Rio de Janeiro, where there's this confluence of mountains and ocean and people and walkability. Have you spent any time down
So a
there?
lot of time in Rio.
Yeah. So
Actually,
you still think Vancouver?
yeah,
Yeah.
and I
Of
think
course.
it's the snow-capped mountains. I think that really bring more texture to it, and more greenery. Um, I think the other place would probably be the eastern suburbs of Sydney, where you feel like you're in the Caribbean, but it's still like about a 10-minute drive to downtown Sydney. It's a pretty phenomenal place too.
Cool. Well, I'm delighted to delighted to spend this time with you, and thank you so much for chatting with me about your book. So I've got a pile of them right here. Of course, one of them is an audio only, so I didn't bring that one. But why don't we start off with your first book, which is Catch 22 by Joseph Heller. I'll take 30 seconds to give the listeners a picture of the book, and then I'll ask you to tell us about your
Okay.
relationship of it. So I'm holding a blue paperback book. Catch 22 with a sort of a dancing red, kind of army private on the front. This is the 50th anniversary. The back says, 50 years after its original publication, Catch 22 remains a cornerstone of American literature and one of the funniest and most celebrated books of all time. In recent years, it has been named to the best novels list by Time, Newsweek, the Modern Library, and the London Observer. Set in Italy during World War II, this is the story of the incomparable, malingering bombardier Yossarian, a hero who is furious because thousands of people he has never met are trying to kill him. But his real problem is not the enemy, it's his own army, which keeps increasing the number of missions the men must fly to complete their service. Yet, if Yossarian makes any attempt to excuse himself from the perilous missions he's assigned, he'll be in violation of Catch 22, a hilariously sinister bureaucratic rule. A man is considered insane if he willingly continues to fly dangerous missions, but if he makes a formal request to be removed, he's proven sane and therefore ineligible to be relieved. Tell us about your relationship with Catch 22 by Joseph Heller.
Well, the 20 pilots or so that are in this book that are flying these missions over northern Italy, they're about 19, 22 years old. So there I was 19 years old when I read this book, so I could put myself in that framework. And the way it works is
So we're
that,
talking 60s, 70s here?
yeah, I was maybe 70, 75,
Okay.
70.
75.
Yeah. So these 20 pilots or so, they're flying missions over northern Italy, and they have this very egotistical colonel who wants to become a general. So he basically makes his own pilots like fly more missions over northern Italy. So consequently, as they get to 20 and they're allowed to go home, he jumps it to 30. When they get to 30, he jumps it to 50, and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So eventually then you have to die. There's no way of actually flying forever over these bond missions without dying, which of course a lot of the men die in it. Yossarian hasn't got there yet. And so then it becomes it really became clear to me that, I am going to die someday. And why wait till I'm, 85 to start living the life I want to live? What would it be like if I knew at the age of 19 I had another month to live? And so it has a bunch of different scenarios in there where life is actually could be longer if it's actually life is quite boring. So that's one of the premises. So
Say that again?
well,
Life? Yeah.
for instance, when you were in physics in grade 10, that class seemed to last forever, right? Or it did for me, like about
I
a
know what
week,
you're saying, yeah.
right? Where if I was outside playing a game of football,
Right.
it lasted about 2 seconds. So, and actually, because they knew that they only had like days to live, maybe even on tomorrow, one of the concepts was to make their lives as boring as possible. Check into hospitals, stare at the ceiling, stand in line at movie theaters, and get to the front, and then move to the back again and stand in line. I mean, that's one of many
Yeah,
concepts.
that's how the book opens. He's in the hospital just pretending to be sick.
Right.
Yeah.
So on top of that, it's really a book about business, I would say. So how in big corporate businesses, the people on top are trying to make themselves look better and get to the top, make more money, gain more power in very nefarious ways, not really caring about in this case, the war or the people. So insight into that. But more so, I think, as a 19-year-old, it's just like living life in the moment, enjoying every second, and knowing that I could get run over by a bus, I could have a disease, something could happen, and I'm only on this world for a very, very short amount of time, and I've got to maximize every moment.
Wow, what a beautiful kind of emotional scenescape you just gave us on how it affected you. You mentioned business, and I sort of feel like there's a theme of sort of bureaucratic absurdity in the book. It comes out in the back with this whole concept of catch-22, but part of the value of the book is, of course, it pokes a hole in this sort of corporate culture of the lies, the politics, the ladder climbing, et cetera, of the American army. I worked for Walmart for 10 years, world's largest company, right? I was bureaucracy was something that they actively fought and had to. It was a 2.5 million person company. You formed one of the biggest companies in the world. Can I ask you, so on bureaucracy, can you tell me what helps eliminate bureaucracy? What helps it prevent it in big companies as they get bigger? This book talks about the problems of it. How do we, many people listening, are forming companies, have small companies? What makes companies stay clean, efficient, effective, instead of becoming, like the U.S. Army depicted in the book, this sort of bureaucratic nightmare?
Well, I think there's two things, and they come out of the next two books we're going to read. One would be to create a linguistic abstraction, I call it. So at Lululemon, I had 5 books that are either audios or courses, 5 things that I used. And from that, there were 30 terms and definitions. and that's what we use for our culture. That's what we use for communication. So part of that linguistic would be there is no communication without a buy-win date and conditions of satisfaction. So at the end of a communication in business, unless I'm saying to you, like, I need the answer to these 4 questions done by June 30th at 12 noon, there is no real clear communication. And people are actually irresponsible for not asking for it in that way. And the people that are getting the instructions are irresponsible for not asking to make sure that those 2 things are done.
And the conditions of satisfaction, meaning, if I give it to you and it meets X, Y, and Z from the beginning, we agree, you'll be happy with it.
Right. And it has people be responsible, but also it's what is integrity. So it would be another one. So doing what I say I will do by when I say I will do it. And if I don't get it done by that time, going and fixing the problem, and also setting up new conditions of satisfaction with new buy-win dates. So I am responsible if I don't even show up to a meeting on time, or I don't get a project in time, and I have to clean it up. And so those are 2 things that really, I think, have a company stop the bureaucracy. I think the second thing, or the other thing I'd like to say, is creating a culture where leaders create leaders. So my job as a leader was to create 4 or 5 leaders who in turn wanted to create other leaders. And leaders are people that create a future that would otherwise not have occurred. And they give without expectation in return. And these things create a culture then where people get up in the morning, they come to work, they want to be extraordinary. They want to it's not fighting the bureaucracy. Bureaucracy can't even exist if all these principles kind of are in place.
And you make it sound easy. I mean, my job was director of leadership development at Walmart. That's what I did. And I know, we had ladder climbers. We had people that have, there's their personal agenda. By being a leader who doesn't develop successors, they get to stay in a high pay, high executive role for longer. Or when they leave, it looks like they were needed more because there's a big hole that nobody can fill.
Those are the worst.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So, and you hire people from other companies, you're going to get some of that sort of bureaucratic baggage from them. And as the company gets bigger, it's impossible not to hire from other companies. So is it up to the leader to just sort of lead by example to make sure that these integrity and sort of like, you called it doing what I say, these things, these things actually happen? Or were there systems or little tools you put in place that really made that work?
No, I put those in place, but you're right. I mean, eventually those professional interviewers sneak in. They've done so many interviews in their life, they actually know how to interview for the job. They're usually good salesmen. They can fool people. And I really like this thing that I heard out of Google where they call it the bozo effect, where you hire one person that's not the culture, who's not a leader, who's faking it. And the law of attraction kicks in. They attract other people who are like them
Yeah.
because subconsciously people are, attracted to their own type. And so you end up with a whole part of the company that's doesn't fit culturally wise or business wise with the rest.
Yeah.
And that has to be purged.
Yeah, Tom DeLonge was my professor of organizational behavior at Harvard Business School, and he had a famous quote he used to say, which is 9s and 10s hire 9s and 10s. 7s and 8s hire 5s and 6s who hire 3s and 4s. So make sure you don't slip down that slope because you'll never get back up.
Yeah.
The other theme that I wanted to pull from Catch-22, if you don't mind, is actually about masculinity. It's such a masculine book, nearly all male characters, such a very male, and of course it's written in the 50s and 60s, very male-centric point of view. It seems like the typical kind of man's content is changing. And I know with your history in fitness, I want to talk to you. I saw this ad recently for like a local boxing club. I'm from Toronto. And it's like a lady kicking a guy in the nuts. Like that's the ad on a billboard. I'm like, what is going on? Can you talk to me about where you think masculinity is going? You saw it faster than anybody else kind of 20, 30 years ago. And it seems like in the world today, it's under threat, like there's a lot of people getting airtime, like say a Jordan Peterson around defending or proclaiming what a man should be. And I was wondering, because you were so prophetic about it with Lululemon in the 80s and 90s, where's it going in the next 20, 30 years? What do you see coming?
Well, I'm very agnostic about the whole thing. I definitely set up Lululemon on the fact that 62% of the graduates at a university in 1998 were women.
Right. I heard you say that in an interview.
So it was actually that particular point when I knew that actually the trigger or the switch had gone over to the woman era. So now you might say like after World War I and II, when like 60 million men died, and and these men came back from the war, and corporate culture was very masculine and very military driven. There were few men. I mean, if you can kind of get it. So it became a men's culture, just like if you looked at it a different way, like if there were few women, women would all have the power. But nobody really looks at it that way. Like our world was created, I think, out of that era. So then you have this, this thing that happens in I think the 80s and 90s where everyone's complaining that women aren't succeeding in school. It's all about men. But things then switched. It all became about women. And so I also think something funny happened at that in the 90s. There always used to be male superheroes, like on cartoons in Lycra. And starting, I think probably in the mid 80s or something like that, suddenly you got a girl in, because they wanted to bring girls in to watch the cartoons.
Sure. Wonder Woman.
Yeah. But exactly. And they'd have the amazing whatever group of them. But the girls had equal powers to the men in one way or the other. They all dressed in Lycra. And I think that was the first time you saw like a woman like kind of bashing and smashing men, so to speak. I think it's a really difficult thing when you have women that are shown beating men up, especially in movies like that. I mean, it's just stupid, and it's all fantasy. And I think it sends the wrong direction for a woman. Now, saying that, we're moving into a world where there is no fighting. There is no hand-to-hand combat anymore. Everything's being done by drones. Everything is being done by a computer in Washington and being sent out like that. The world of hand-to-hand combat is like negligible anymore, right, which actually puts women even on a higher space. They don't need men to kind of figure out how to get from one place to the other, which was man's job as a caveman, trying to figure out their way through the mountains, because now we have GPS.
And safety and security. Right. I'm talking 200,000 years ago, right?
Right.
Like, my muscles are not as valuable anymore.
Yeah, and
not that I have many of them.
15, 20 years ago, there was a woman sued New York State because they wouldn't give her sperm because they felt like she was inappropriate to reproduce, which she probably was, but because she'd paid taxes to New York State and the New York State owned the sperm clinic, they had to give her sperm. So now we're in a world where anybody like before, nature would kind of say, no, you're not appropriate to reproduce because you're just crazy. Now that's not true. So so basically women don't need men. We're really moving into a very
Well, it's
fascinating
topple the
time of the world.
patriarchy. Like this is like I'm seeing that on greeting cards. Like literally says like from one woman to another, let's topple the patriarchy. And that's what I'm wondering, like, what's the future of men, in the next 10, 20 years? So do you remain agnostic about where it's going? You kind of watching from a distance. I'm curious because you saw it better than anybody 20 years ago.
Yeah.
You've put your finger on this movement of men into these spaces that you served. I know it was largely a female movement, as you say, but it's like, you still put your finger on. You were going to yoga class yourself.
Yeah.
You were the first guy there. I think you said, right? And so you saw it coming. You were part of the movement. And so I thought it was interesting to ask you that. I appreciate you taking some time to open that up for us a bit.
Well, I think the other thing that happened when women started to took over at 60% of the graduates at university, inside of that, there was a bunch of reasons I kind of come to that conclusion. But one of them was that there was so many divorces in the 70s. And I think these girls that were starting to graduate in 1998 had seen their mothers have to work so hard without the right education and kind of overstressed. And these women, I think, really pushed their daughters to be phenomenal. And I think the girls just naturally went, I've got to be phenomenal because I just don't want to work like my mom. But inside of that, I also think that boys got babied and coddled because their father wasn't around to kick the shit out of them every so often, and the mothers would do everything for them. So our society flipped around. And so I think that not only were women highly educated, but they were getting better jobs. And then the boys just never really stepped up to plate to be men. And so you have this whole era also of highly accomplished women with very underaccomplished men. And I think that's a big problem.
Well, you have 5 sons, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
I have 3. They're all under 5 years old.
Yeah.
Mine. And so I'm asking partly as a dad of 3 boys, saying, how do my wife and I often think, how do we raise our children to be the best men that we can? And so thanks for opening that up. There's lots of we could talk for hours or I don't want to get too philosophical, but I appreciate you're so honest, and that's what I love about you. You open up, and that's so valuable. I have lots more questions about Joseph Heller, but I think in the interest of time, I better squeak over to your second book, which is called The Psychology of Achievement by Brian Tracy. So it's an audio tape book published by Simon & Schuster in 1984. The world's foremost producer of personal development and motivational audio programs offers an inside look at the thinking that leads to great achievement. Drawing on the work of leading psychologists and behavioral researchers, Brian Tracy, known as America's success mentor, demonstrates the attitude, deep self-knowledge, and pinpointed goals that are important factors in achieving great success. So tell us about your relationship with The Psychology of Achievement by Brian Tracy.
Okay, great. So when I sold my company, Westbeach snowboard company, to a place in Salem, Oregon, I had to drive back and forth from Vancouver to Salem every weekend because I had 2 boys in Vancouver. And I decided to make the most of it, so I had a goal of listening to 100 books that year. Same thing I did when I was 19 years old, by the way. I put everything on audio and I just started listening. So I listened to 100, and I really, out of the whole thing, I came up with like 5 books that really, I think, encompassed everything else. And one of those was Psychology of Achievement. So why listen to the other 95 when you can just read these 5? So it's quite long. It's about 8 hours of audio.
Yeah.
And it really, Brian, kind of, it's asked the question, what do successful people do? Like, what do they all do in common?
Yeah.
And so
I have it right here.
Yeah.
Oops, sorry. I was listening to it last night when I was stressed in traffic on the way here. It's chilling me out.
Yeah. No, it's really good. And it's the incredible thing about it is it's nothing anybody doesn't know in 8 hours. But to move it from the subconscious to the conscious and to put the puzzle pieces together all in one picture is what really makes it amazing. So he'll talk about family communication, how to raise family, how to communicate in a business, how to give to charity, and then the thing that I really used and got out of it was the psychology of goal setting, why people do and do not goal set. And I was such a driven goal setter from swimming, because in swimming, when you turned an age group, that was the date when you had a certain record to beat. So it was quantifiable with a by-win date to do something. And I thought from swimming, then I always did that myself. But I never really knew what I was doing until I listened to Brian Tracy and got why people goal set. So to actually have a set of goals then where it's quantifiable with the buy-win date. So I will be 230 pounds by December 1st, 2019 is a specific goal. So then to learn like computer, garbage in, garbage out. So if you don't give the computer in our minds that exact conditions of satisfaction with the buy-win date, the brain just doesn't know what to do with it. But if you do give it like that, it will work 24/7 on it. And that's why I think people who goal set and set it in the right way get more out of what they want in life.
So true. And so much research confirms people that write down goals, are more likely to achieve them, and so relevant. But you also mentioned it's nothing that people don't know. And it's interesting you said that, because this book clearly fits under the category of self-help and motivation. Examples are 6 requirements of success, right? He's like peace of mind, high level of health, loving relationships, financial freedom. You're like, yeah, I get that stuff. And I remember kind of in the early days of Lululemon, I remember the red bag, with all the stamps on the side, like sweat every day, friends are more important than money. And I'm kind of in that space. Like the reason I'm wearing a suit right now is because I'm about to hop over to the convention center and give, for lack of better words, a motivational speech right now to 1,000 doctors. But this whole industry is kind of like poo-pooed on. Like people look at it and they're just like, it's hollow, it's empty. Motivational speakers, you think of Chris Farley on Saturday Night Live, the guy falling through the table, or like Tom Cruise in Magnolia. But you embraced it wholeheartedly at Lululemon. You slapped it on the sides of the bags. It was on the walls of the stores. Why is there so much cynicism around motivation? How can we get over ourselves? I'm trying to learn that myself. Like I even called myself a motivation speaker. That was a word I would reject strongly, to very recently. I'm like, I'm a business speaker. I talk about leadership. I give people, but yet you've embraced it. And even this book is out of print. I had to dig into Audible archives to kind of find it. It seems like we don't have much space right now for these simple, common sense tools, but that we need. It inspired you. It inspires me. Why the dourness? Do you agree with me about that? Yeah.
I think it's pretty easy.
Yeah.
I always noticed that at Westbeach, my previous company, that even I wanted people to do the types of things that I was doing around this, but they would rather spend $500 on a jacket than $500 on their brain, because the jacket is tangible and they can see actually what they got out of it. Usually when you work on your brain, it's hard to metric around it. So I'd say that's the big
Even though
problem.
that's your most valuable asset in the world by far.
By far. And the thing you want to invest in the most if you want to get to where you want to go by a certain time. So that's really all I can say about it.
No, that's helpful. There's a quote by Brian in this book. It says, "Never complain, never explain. Resist the temptation to defend yourself or make excuses." Do you resonate with that?
Well, for sure. And a lot of this then comes into the course that we took, the Landmark Forum. But I really got where, when I stopped complaining is when I had access to be responsible to do something about the situation. So I have a thing where if I complain twice about something, then either I take action or I shut up about it.
Wow. If I complain twice about anything, I take action or I shut up.
Right.
And how do you hold yourself to that level of discipline? I'm cranky every time I kind of wake up after a bad night's sleep. How do I?
Well,
no, I'm just saying, how do you hold your mind so strongly in that place?
Well, I do know if I complain more than twice, people are pretending to listen to me, but they're not listening to me
It's not
anymore.
effective.
I know I don't listen to people after they complain about something twice, but I start to listen to people if they go, "This is what I'm complaining about, and this is what I'm going to do about it, and this is the time I'm going to do it by." And then you go, "Man, that's a powerful person that's going to get things done in their life."
Do you do anything to grow that strength in your mind? Like, I'm hearing a lot of amazing systematic
Yeah.
thinking in your brain. I'm sure it's a huge reason why you're so successful. I know people would rather buy a jacket than invest in their mind. And I know maybe it's getting at the landmark, but like, what do you do to grow those muscles up here? I'm tapping my head for those who can't see me. How do you grow that thing? You're a physical guy. I heard you say
Yeah.
you go into the gym 3 times a day. I went to the gym this morning. I did some swimming. What are the laps? What are the workouts I should be doing up here?
Well, to give some foundation to that, when I was 18, working in the Alaska oil pipeline and doing my drugs and drinking and being a teenage boy type of thing, but I was I was an athlete before, like a Canadian swimming team athlete. So my mom sent me an article by Art Bushwald, and it said that that the brain works exactly the same way as the body. Like, you have to train the body to be great. And I was doing like four hours of training a day, and I knew I was I could actually feel and be the results. And again, it was metrics. I worked hard. My swimming times lowered. I could see the results of it. So then to kind of think, oh, like the brain works the same way. So I actually have to train the brain in the same way I train my body. So that is when, as I kind of go back, I spent the rest of that year, I read 100 books that year at the age of 19. So I think I was probably the best read 19-year-old in the world.
You probably were.
Yeah.
You probably were. Amazing. Thank you. And thank you so much. I'm also thinking that you got to connect with Rich Roll, a friend of mine who runs an amazing podcast and also former competitive swimmer. Let's use this as a transition to your third and final book, which is the incredible Good to Great by Jim Collins, a bright red hardcover I'm holding with just the simple language, good to, and then great in big caps. Subheadline is Why Some Companies Make the Leap and Others Don't. Published in 2001 by Harper Business, Jim Collins and his management kind of laboratory in Boulder, Colorado, looked at how some companies made the leap from good companies to what they call great, at least 7 times the results of the general stock market over a sustained period of 15 years. This book sold over 4 million copies. It's one of the most influential books in management and in business. Tell us about your relationship with Good to Great by Jim Collins.
Well, to live a life worth living, why live a mediocre life? Like, why do anything that's good? I mean, at the end of the day, I think we all sit on our deathbed and go, like, did I get the most out of my life? Did I risk the right way? Was it kind of worth doing any job, like kind of part way or halfway, or even being in a conversation with someone halfway? It's just a wasted life. So what I really got out of it is how easy it is for people to create the context that they're great when actually all they are is good.
I mean, that's the opening line of the book. Good is the enemy of great.
Yeah, it's a really fantastic line. So I was really amazed at how they talked about a level 5 leader. And a level 5 leader, going back to what we talked about before, was someone who creates a yeah, there it is there. Creates trains and develops someone under them to be better than what they are.
Right.
And so I think it goes back to Lee Iacocca at Chrysler, like, who said, like, a great CEO. But no, he wasn't, because when he left nobody to run Chrysler after.
I believe he describes it as the combination of will and humility.
Yeah.
So he had will, maybe not the humility part.
Yeah.
And, there's this line in the book, good is the enemy of great. And that's one of the reasons why we have so little that becomes great. We don't have great schools because we have good schools. We don't have great government because we have good government. Few people attain great lives, as you said, in large part because it's just so easy to settle for a good life. You clearly resonate with the theme of this book, But this book only measures success based on stock market results. That is its measurement tool. You created an organization and several organizations now that have a much broader criteria for measuring greatness.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask you, how do you think about greatness? How do you measure that? If you're talking, and you are right now, talking to people who are inside companies, or a lot of entrepreneurs listening to this show, what are the measures of success that we should think about as we think about greatness in the future?
Well, what I do know is the things that I would talk about. I mean, which is, people say it all the time, culture. How do you measure that? And you can really, I've come to that, to people that don't believe in the soft parts of businesses. The only way you can describe to them the success of the soft side is 5 years of stock market. Because you have to look at it. This is stuff you have to look at it over a very long period of time. This is very, and I don't want to, I'm kind of saying, do I want to say it's airy fairy stuff? It's really no understanding culture, the underlying psychology of why people work, what gets them up in the morning, what drives them beyond what they would just normally do getting up for a paycheck. I really came from the point of view that way differently. I want to get at profits by first making my employees being fully self-developed themselves, and then their families. I always felt like if people really knew themselves and knew what was getting in the way of them being great, and we could kind of break through that and do that in a very short amount of time, and then they could take that to their families, they would almost become evangelistic about those programs for the business. And then the business could become what it is. But I never came out of it for the best, what's best for the business, always what's best for the employee and their family.
And he says in this book, a company should limit its growth based on its ability to attract enough of the right people. And you're hinting at that. I know Lululemon is famous for its development programs internally. I don't know them close enough. I think there was things around reading books and going to courses and so on. But how? I mean, I have one employee, and it's hard to find the right people, right? Like it's you grew it to to thousands and thousands of people. It must be impossible at that stage to keep finding people that can take energy back to their families. Like, how do you paint a picture of that why and that where the ship is sailing so clearly for people? It's hard to do that.
Well, it doesn't exist at Lululemon now, but it can. I mean, this is what I'm trying to do all I can to transform the company back to this soft point exactly. I think that, again, it comes back to the term linguistic abstraction, setting up every entrepreneur, I think, can set up 5 books or audios or something that would create that linguistic abstraction to create the culture.
Can you say more about that for us, for those that don't know, like
Sure.
me, anything about I'm lost in that phrase a bit.
Yeah. So I had people read Good to Great, listen to the Psychology of Achievement, listen to the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, read a book, The Goal by I think Rosenblatt, about Japanese production. It's a fictional type book, and then do the Landmark Forum.
Wow.
So this really everybody, and they could do that all in a 2-week period. So I assume that everybody in the world is great, but they just don't have access to kind of break through the door to know what greatness is. And I'd say especially for 20 to 30-year-olds who are living in this world of, and I of course I go back to myself. I was always, when I was working in the corporate world, I was thinking will I ever get married? Will I ever have a date on Friday night? Will I ever be able to go on holidays? Will I ever own a house? How can you get a mortgage? What happens if I die? What happens to my parents when they get old? All these things. And I was only bringing maybe 60% of my brain to work. And so to give people the structure to go to, I mean, that's kind of where goal setting comes in. That's part of it. But then also being responsible for how their life turns out, where complaining gets into it, what responsibility is, what's integrity. So these are, once people get this base, and it only takes 2 weeks to do, it's just absolutely amazing.
Yeah. And you gave them specific books to read. No company I know does that.
Yes, exactly.
It's like a curriculum.
Yeah.
And to close things off, and I want to be respectful of your time, and I know you've got got to run. I heard you say on another podcast interview as I was preparing for this one, your definition of life success. And my jaw dropped. It sounded exactly like it came out of my wife's mouth. You said, the way I evaluate my life, and I'm paraphrasing, you can correct me here, it's how I would feel about my life if I'm 85 years old, I'm at a big Thanksgiving dinner with all of my children, all of my grandchildren, everybody's laughing at something I said, which means that they like me, we are connected, we are loving. That's exactly my wife Leslie's vision of a great life. To the point, she talks about it because the show Parenthood has these scenes of the family eating together. She's like, that's what I want.
Yeah.
So close us off, Chip. How do we get there? What are the ingredients that make that vision of success, which I think many of us share? I know my wife shares that deeply. What are the ingredients that help us on that path? And that's part of what we're trying to explore with this show.
Great. So when I was 20, 25, I'm a single man, right? I'm in survival mode. I'm just trying to figure life out. But it's more like it's all about me, totally about me. And then I get married and I have a family. I have 2 boys. Food is barely coming in through the door. We're barely able to pay the mortgage payments. As a man, I'm totally in survival. I'm only thinking about myself and my family. So I've moved to a different level. And then I really got at the age of 42, even though I'd sold my company. I had a little bit of money, like $800,000, but that's after 20 years of working. And I really got that it's really if I want to be successful in life and I want my life to have meaning, it's all about everybody else. So how can I be of service to the world? How can I give without expectation of return? And it's a bridge to cross that is so difficult, because when you have to pay the mortgage and you have to feed the kids, to start putting other people before the family and myself, it's really difficult. But once I got that mindset and I became that type of person, then I found the law of attraction kicks in, which is from Brian Tracy's Psychology of Achievement. The law of attraction is I attract into my life the type of person that I am. So if I'm giving, I think of other people, and I have all these concepts in the way that I am, and it's true, and it's not, I'm faking it, I'm not looking good because people see through looking good, then I become the type of person that people just want to be around. And for children, grandchildren, I think that if a father is really good, or as a grandfather, then you're good because they'll joke to you, because they'll joke about you and they'll make fun of you because they know that's their form of loving. And that's the way to live a life, I think.
Wise words from Chip Wilson. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for coming. That's fun.
Hey everybody, it's just Neil again. Thank you so much to Chip Wilson for that fun and fast-paced conversation in Gastown, Vancouver. Some quotes I just picked out from today's chapter. I'm gonna die someday, so why wait until I'm 85 to start living the life I want? And this is interesting. Life can be longer if your life is quite boring. Physics in grade 10 seemed to last forever, whereas if I was outside playing a game of football, it always lasted 2 seconds. Leaders create a future that would otherwise have not occurred, and they give without expectation. And finally, when I stopped complaining is when I had access to be responsible to do something about the situation. And this great insight that if I complain twice about something, I either take action or I shut up about it. So many little nuggets of wisdom dropped on us from Chip Wilson. I want to just say a big thanks to him for taking the time to sit down with us. Much appreciated. And thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for listening to Chapter 19. And now, if you've waited and made it to this far in the podcast, I'd like to welcome you back to the end of the podcast club. This is the club where you talk directly to me, I talk directly to you. We have a little fun little suffix at the end of every show. So now, like we always do, let's start off by going to the phones.
Hi, Neil. My name is Adam, and I live in Kelowna, BC. I recently found your podcast, Three Books, and absolutely love it. It's been really inspiring for me. I have a rare neurological disorder called visual snow syndrome, and as a result, I cannot look at computer screens. So I'm pretty isolated, and books have become a big thing. Unfortunately, my disorder can also cause me to not be able to read books. I recently went through a month of not being able to read, which was extremely devastating, and I did a lot of crying as a result because I just felt even more isolated without my books. So keep up the great work with this podcast. It's super inspiring and is helping me find even more books to add to my list of books to help me engage in it and keep me entertained and help me to grow as a person as well. So keep up the great work, and I love the podcast.
Thank you so much to Adam from Kelowna, BC for making that call. What an interesting perspective, and one I guess I'm sure I hadn't considered just the idea that, if you aren't able to read, how do you stay connected? And I don't know if you listened to chapter 18 with David Sedaris, but he makes this comment at the beginning about how, like, some podcasts, when you listen to them, it just sounds like you're just hanging out with a bunch of people. And I sort of said, well, isn't that, I didn't want to push him. I was just getting to know David Sedaris, but I was like, maybe that's what we want. Maybe that's a solution to this bigger issue where we feel more disconnected from each other, right? We live alone now more than we've ever lived. We have more loneliness now than we've ever had before. We segregate ourselves into these tiny little communities and subgroups. And Brené Brown calls us the most sorted generation in history. Sorted, S-O-R-T-E-D, not S-O-R-D-I-D, although I guess maybe you could argue for both. But sorted, and it's like hearing your voice and your voicemail, Adam, actually touched my heart because it connected us together. I don't know you, and I don't know if we'll ever meet, but we got connected for a little minute there, and that is a really special and unique thing that podcasts can do. And so thank you so much for calling in and for reminding me of that. And now it is time for the review of the chapter. As you know, we always read out a review. We love reviews. Please leave us a review. And then we give a signed copy of any of my books to whomever's review we read. I know I got that word wrong. I don't want to go back and fix it because I don't know actually how to say it. Who's ever? Yeah, that's probably what it is. Hi, Neil. As an amateur astronomer, I always look forward to the new moon because the skies are darker with better viewing. But of course, I always look forward to the full moons because what's not to love but a full moon? Now I have another reason to anticipate the phases of the moon. I really enjoy the podcast. It's a nice change from murder mysteries. I guess what is up with murder mysteries taking over podcasts? I don't know. My only suggestion to improve the podcast is less seconds of intro music. Interesting. I'm going to talk about that in a second. I'm off to the library to find some new titles. Oh, and by the way, Emily's Smothered by Kale card is the best I have ever heard. Lynn. Thank you so much to Lynn. I agree. Emily McDowell does make the best cards, doesn't she? And as for the seconds of theme music, yeah, you know what's interesting? I always used about 45, 50 seconds of theme music, but I just threw the intro in the middle, right? But I noticed most podcasts have this like little quick 5-second jingle, and then you're in the content. And I know that's what people want. Everyone's busy and all that stuff. But I just feel like it's really important to take a breath, take a pause, recenter yourself, ground yourself. Like, that music, I hired a classical musician composer who's just fantastic. And I said, I want to just sort of build and build and build into the deeper and deeper themes of life. And I want the music and also the show to have a vintage and analog feel. So that's why we have an analog only fan club, for example. That's why the music starts with like the click and record of the play button. And so I really like the music. And I know for me, I'm sort of busy, harried, fast paced, whatever. But I need that. I need a moment. 45 seconds isn't that much to ground myself. And so I've lengthened it a little bit. I've just taken the intro out and put it afterwards. And that's why. So maybe that explains why. It doesn't mean it works for everybody. But I appreciate you writing in, Lynn. Thank you. And now it's time for the word of the chapter. Let's go over to Chip for the word.
Well, I'm very agnostic about the whole thing.
Yes, it is agnostic. Agnostic. I mean, I've heard this word used a ton of times, but I don't think I ever stopped to really look up the history and origin of it. It's really interesting. So agnostic, the definition according to Merriam-Webster. Oh, let's hear it. Let's hear it. Come on, dictionary lady.
Agnostic.
There we go. A person who holds the view that any ultimate reality, such as God, is unknown and probably unknowable. A person who holds the view that any ultimate reality is unknown and probably unknowable. Nice it says such as God. It doesn't mean only in regards to religion. Of course, Chip was talking about the future of masculinity there and the future of kind of clothing and things like that. So what's the origin? Well, actually, it's a pretty new word. It only came into being around 1869 in September when a guy by the name of T.H. Huxley used the word derived from the Greek word agnostos, agnostos, which means unknown or unknowable. Why? You can look right into the word. It's kind of interesting. A means not, okay, and nostos, gnosts, means to be known. Agnostic is not to be known. Okay. Thank you so much to Chip for the word of the chapter. And so now we bid each other a farewell and adieu for 2018. I have some extra special news also. I didn't share it at the beginning. Maybe I should have, but 3 Books has just been crowned with this big award. Apple Podcasts has just declared our show, our little show, to be the winner of the best podcasts of 2018. So yeah, that's amazing. Of the millions of podcasts out there and the millions more coming, we're in like this little tiny sample group of like 20 that have been crowned with this little award. And so I wanted to share that with you at the very end because it's pretty special. And it means that what we're doing is something of value. This focus on intentional living, on getting back to basics and reading real books and paying attention to the themes that come up from them, and doing so in an era, in a world that's covered in ads and covered in distractions, and doing so without distractions and without ads, and trying to talk directly and sincerely about things that matter most. Well, it means it's working and it's growing, and it's doing so because of you. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much. And until next time, remember that you are what you eat and you are what you read. I'll talk to you soon.